21st, and the time is approximately 2:14 in the afternoon. I'd like to begin with discussion of item 1, and if staff would please come forward.
Item number 1 is a discussion relative to the Homelessness Prevention and Rapid Rehousing Program.
We can share a microphone, Michael.
Okay. Who would like to begin?
I'll begin. I'm Sally Richmond from the Los Angeles Housing Department, and we've been working with LAHSA on preparing the substantial amendment. So I can give you a brief overview of what it is. Okay. So the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARRA, has allocated $1.5 billion nationwide for this new program, and the city has been allocated $29.4 million over a 3-year period. An application for these funds is via a substantial amendment to the consolidated plan, which we have made a draft of, published on our city's website, and that is due to HUD by May 18th at the latest. And to fast-track the expenditure of these programs, HUD used the existing Emergency Shelter Grant Program, but this program, which is called Homelessness Prevention and Rapid Rehousing, or we call it HPRP for short, we don't call it ESG because it's a totally different, or it's a different program. So LEHD was asked by the council and mayor to act as the administering agency for this and to submit the application and to work with LAHSA in developing the program. We presented a transmittal about it. So LAHSA is working on program development, which they will discuss. We have to enter into contracts with subgrantees by September 30th. We should hear from HUD by July 2nd if they've accepted our substantial amendment, if they want changes or additional information. If necessary, there'll be some back and forth, but by September 30th, we have to have an agreement to and a contract to put the money out on the street. And this program serves people with higher income than their typical homeless programs. Goes up to 50% of median income, which is for an individual $27,750 a year. Have family of 4, $39,650. So it's a little bit higher. And the funds are supposed to be prioritized for households who are most in need, who would be homeless but for this assistance, and who are most likely to achieve stability after this short-term assistance is completed, whether in subsidized or unsubsidized housing. And we have to spend 60% of the funding within a 2-year period and all of it within 3 years. And our deadlines start when HUD signs the grant agreement. And every client assisted with this is going to have to be captured in the Homeless Management Information System. So if there are agencies that are involved that are not already part of the continuum of care, they will need to be brought up to speed and provided software and so forth for that. And since it's a new program, we're still working on development, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues at LAHSA.
Okay, who'd like to go next?
Sure, I'll go next. Good afternoon, council members. I'm Mike Arnold. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for LAHSA. I'd like to talk just very briefly about the program aspects of this funding. As the name implies, it's really designed to provide prevention, homelessness prevention, and it is also intended to provide rapid rehousing, and that is folks who are currently homeless who can be immediately assisted and provided rental assistance, case management, and the like to get back into housing as rapidly as possible. The program design allows for a maximum benefit period of 18 months, and that can include 6 months in arrears. It is a challenging program to administer because it's really a rental assistance program. I mean, while there are case management aspects to it, there are credit counseling components that are part of it. It is primarily, we expect a significant amount of that funding is going to go into rental assistance. If it is rapid rehousing types of programs, that housing will need to be inspected. And one of the things that we're looking at as we look at the program design is trying to maximize the ability for this program to benefit the most number of beneficiaries throughout the city. It comes with what we consider the very low ESG overhead amount. That's 5% of the total award is available for administrative costs. HUD expects that a portion of those administrative costs be passed through to whoever is actually doing the programs. So it leaves a very small amount for the administration part. And what that challenges us to do is look at where we have existing infrastructure and how we leverage off of that existing infrastructure to maximize those benefits are available. So when we look at program design, LAHD is sitting at the table, LOS is sitting at the table, HACLA, the Housing Authority, is sitting at the table because we think we each have unique talents and expertise that can build and leverage on in ways that allow us to serve the maximum number of beneficiaries in this program. It's important to talk about what it's not. It's not a mortgage assistance program. It's not a program that can be used to supplant other funds. And it's not a program that can be spent on expenditures or costs that are being funded by other components of the stimulus package. However, there is an expectation that other components such as job training will be built into integrating this because, again, once folks receive this benefit, they are expected to be self-sustaining in housing at the conclusion of the benefit period. It also offers some unique opportunities to leverage on other public resources that we make available, particularly when we look at Section 8. One of the challenges we have with Section 8 is oftentimes people may have a Section 8 voucher, but they don't have first and last month's rent. This program can provide that cash assistance to the landlord to provide first and last month's rent, security deposits, utility deposits, so we can, in fact, get people housed more quickly. We can also use this funding to house people while they may be in the queue for Section 8 if we expect those individuals to receive that assistance within that 18-month benefit period. So it can be tied together with other programs in, I think, very creative ways. And it will be challenging for us to I think, collectively look at leveraging what we have so that we can ensure that the most number of folks can benefit by this, particularly in this very challenging economic time.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Who's next? Hackla.
Heckla.
Say Hackla.
Introduce yourself.
So I'm Peter Lynn. I'm the interim director of Section 8. Recently started, yes. And just want to echo on Mike's points that we're looking primarily.
In the back.
Pull the mic closer.
Yeah, mic just a little bit closer that way they can hear you.
Yeah.
We're certainly looking at the move-in assistance as a key piece, as Mike indicated. We don't do short-term. That would be new, something that's not a piece of the Section 8 program. But coordinating the assistance would certainly be a benefit to the people who are in the pipeline for Section 8.
Okay, and then shelter partnership.
My name is Lakshika Vikram. I'm from Shelter Partnership. So we are really providing technical assistance to LHD and LASA in preparing the program design part for the HPRP implementation. So we look forward to really honing in on things like where to target this assistance down the road using the maps made by LHD.
Okay. Do you want to add anything?
I'll just add briefly, I think all the major points have been touched upon, but just to give you an estimate about how many individuals or how many households could potentially be served through HPRP, just doing some initial calculation, we believe that up to 4,000 households have the potential to being served through the Homeless Prevention and Rapid Rehousing Program. And we've come to this figure by doing some estimation using HUD fair market rents for 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments because individuals and families can be served through this, and estimating an average of a shallow subsidy for up to 6 months and a deep subsidy for 6 months, meaning 100% of shallow being an estimate that it's 50% subsidy for 12 months and a deep subsidy meaning 100% of that subsidy for 6 months. Doing all of those calculations, we believe that the City of Los Angeles is positioned to serve up to 4,000 households through the Homeless Prevention and Rapid Rehousing Program. So I just wanted to provide you kind of an assessment of how many people would be served.
Okay, just a couple of quick comments, and we'll go the rounds on my colleagues. First, I want to express my gratitude to the Housing Department and the Housing Authority Section 8 Homeless Voucher Program and the accomplishments of the program for both homeless families and disabled individuals, both within this program for the permanent supportive housing program. It's been very transformative. And thank you for highlighting that 4,000 Section 8 homeless vouchers that the mayor and the housing authority have made available have been effectively fully utilized. So, excuse me, I need to know two things. If the housing authority can elaborate on this and whether or not there is an opportunity to obtain or secure more Section 8 homeless vouchers, and if that possibility exists, how many do you think, and in what time frame might we be able to achieve that?
The possibility, there has been certainly discussion of new allocations of vouchers, but there has been no funding notices. We have not received anything that we could go after for new vouchers for homeless. So we're at full utilization in both the set-aside for homeless and in the regular voucher program.
Well, talk to me about the potential for rollover of clients who exit the program, and do the vouchers roll over if, in fact, the numbers occur, say, several hundred within a given time frame?
We certainly reuse vouchers with attrition, and the homeless program has, we've seen attrition actually drop off considerably due to the economic climate.
There's nowhere to go.
There was one path off the program was obviously to earn your way off the program. We're seeing a reduction in that avenue out. So turnover has decreased. We are expecting several hundred vouchers to turn over in the program on a sort of an annual basis, but it's hard to predict the change in attrition based on the changed economic conditions.
Okay, so we're going to have to take a wait-and-see attitude.
I think that's...
And actually, what I'll do is I'll ask you to come back maybe 3 to 6 months and give us some idea of whether or not there's been any indicators or movement. I was talking to a staff person on the way over about some projections that another 70 to 90 days before the market goes as low as it's going to go, and then we may start to see some movement upward again. And that obviously is correlated with housing. So anyway, I'm going to ask for some reports back, but I'll do that at the end of our discussion. So Mr. Garcetti and Mr. Rosendahl, Mr. Garcetti, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make.
Just briefly, I don't know if it's LHD or whom could just run through the administrative cost, the 10% that's allowed. Is this anticipated to be enough for LASA? Or is it 5%? Only 5%, sorry. We just cut it in half right there. What are your worries there on the administrative side? And do you think we have capacity?
Well, I think that 5% is not enough overhead to even do the administrative components of this particular funding. And what makes it particularly challenging, when we look at other homeless programs, we have agencies who have already built programs, they already have infrastructure, and the leveraging can occur throughout sort of the spectrum from point of administration of the contract to the administration and delivery of the services. Because our continuum has really not gotten its fair share for so long, we have the bulk of the funding that has been invested in homeless programs has been really around shelter, transitional housing, permanent housing, supportive service types of programs, and there isn't much infrastructure at all anywhere in the provider agency setting for rental assistance programs, property inspections, all of that go into that. And while those costs probably can be charged to the program, they also are going to require administration to build them. So I really look at this funding as really primarily program funding, and because it's one-time funding, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try and build a lot of infrastructure. We'll probably have to try and build some, and I think it makes a lot of sense to try and strategically build some infrastructure, particularly around the homelessness prevention side and the rapid rehousing side. But this is $29 million, and the Fed's objective of it is to get it distributed as quickly as possible. Right. So I do know in working with other cities, one of the things that is being bantered around is the opportunity the county has made available to tie into their existing DPSS distribution center. DPSS primarily administers CalWorks families, which has a very, very low threshold of income to be eligible for benefits. So anyone who comes into a DPSS office that exceeds about $16,000 and is a family, they have basically no benefits that they can extend to that population. They estimate countywide they're turning away about 1,200 families a month who fall between that $40,000 50% AMI and the $16,000. What they are making available to cities is the option of taking a portion of this, providing it as an additional benefit layer to the existing DPSS distribution center, because they're already doing rental assistance, they're doing property inspections, and all of that go with running rental assistance programs. So there's almost no infrastructure in there. So some cities are looking at that as an option to immediately get that funding out, because all it means is that on September 1st or October 1st, when the contract would be executed with HUD and the funds are available, a family who comes in at $17,000 a year can in fact get rental assistance and receive funding for housing immediately. So those are the kinds of strategies that I think all of the jurisdictions within LA County are trying to figure out how to do and how to manage within the context of this funding.
Mm-hmm. And the only other question, Madam Chair, is how will we be, could you walk us through a little bit more of how you're going to be screening clients and looking at their eligibility for this?
That's a program design piece that hasn't been fully fleshed out yet. We do recognize that it's going to have some unique challenges, particularly since the bulk of who the homeless providers network serves really aren't what we would call individuals or families with moderate barriers. They tend to be the heavier, more service intensive. So it's going to change how they get screened, and there's really going to be a significant focus on ensuring that there is reality in the concept that at the end of the assistance period, those families can be self-sustaining. And again, where we have the opportunity to pair this funding with other benefits, such as Section 8, Shelter Plus Care, other kinds of public assistance programs, and we know what's going to happen, we are able to develop some assurity around the ability for those families to remain housed at the conclusion of the assistance. So the program design will evolve, but we'll look for folks who have a temporary setback, who have reasonably employable or can fairly quickly obtain employable skills, but it's going to be a challenge for us. I think we all recognize that.
Well, one of my only suggestions is the legal aid community and the public interest law community and our CBDOs are the ones who are interfacing, and, you know, they have some failures as well as successes, and on the failure side, those are the ones I think we're as council offices getting a regular stream of folks, and one of the best places to rely on a filter and referrals.
Well, and I think that I want to say that when we look at, we're going to look at as broad a distribution channel as we can, and certainly the legal aid folks have been one area that I think we're going to try and ensure that they're part of this. I think to the extent that we can involve providers, agencies who are currently have infrastructure and programs, we want to include them in that process. To the extent LAHSA, LAHD, HACLA participate to make this happen. I mean, we've got to the extent that we can be broad, it is every intent to do so.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Rosendahl.
Yeah, just to be clear again, we're talking about $29.4 million, and what is this May 18th date? That's the day we get it or submit it, or what?
The May 18th date is the date that the substantial amendment to the consolidated plan has to be postmarked going to HUD. So that amendment has already been completed. It's now being posted, and I believe getting public comment on. The HUD has indicated that they will review and approve that by July 2nd. If for some reason the plan isn't approved, they will provide an additional 2 weeks to perfect the plan. And then the statutory requirements and the regulations is that by September 30th, legal agreements need to be in place to distribute that funding. So that's the critical timeline for that.
September 30th is when the $29.4 million could be flushed into whatever mechanisms we've established.
That's correct.
So between now and then, we're going to figure out the mechanisms.
That's correct.
And in those mechanisms, the criteria, will it be clear enough to know? For instance, be petty, I'm going to be my district. I have people living in cars and campers, okay? I want to get restricted parking. I don't want to throw these people to the wolves. I want to find locations where I can put them. We're going to talk about it as item 6 on the agenda today, a discussion on this particular motion. But I want to be able to provide some of this money, $29.4 million, that might take some of them who are in the car or camper that would rather be in a unit, would rather have psychiatric and mental health and health, and alcohol and drug kinds of issues dealt with, might also want to have the connection to, say, a chrysalis for a job. In other words, those number of cars and camper types that are within the concept of almost homelessness and would like to move on with their lives, would they be able to get a piece of this $29.4 million if we set it up right between now and September?
It depends,
theoretically.
it depends on the circumstances, yes, and I think it's important to recognize there's also sort of a domino effect.
Sure.
While this funding isn't intended to be utilized on homeless individuals who have intensive needs, need long-term therapy, have long-term chronic issues, what it can do is it can be used to create capacity in our existing homeless system, where those who are in there for a very temporary period of time simply need a helping hand to get back into an apartment, get back into rental property. It will open up space within the longer-term continuum process so that it really does create a nice additional element to the continuum that frees up space within the existing homeless provider network for those who have long-term needs, and helps get those who only have a short-term need and can meet the 18-month criteria, frees up space and gets them into housing rapidly.
This is very nice because it means there's flexibility and can backfill other situations.
Yes.
I'll take it one more point because you'll see another agenda item that talks about the winter shelter program. Okay? I had 200 plus, I'm sure they'll give us an analysis here, 200 plus people living in those 2 locations. I did not want to shut them down March 15th. It just wasn't right, but that's called the winter shelter program. Any of these funds be used to complement that, and therefore we don't have to shut the stuff down at March 15th, but could become a continuous. I mean, Ms. Perry has this wonderful new image thing that I've seen, and I would love to be able to not throw people out when you're starting to connect them to social service, starting to connect them to opportunities, and back to the street they go. Can some of this money go to that?
Unfortunately, statutorily, homeless shelters are precluded from appropriate use of these funds. So it may create flexibility in other areas. Part of what we do, and we try and do well, is try and match sources of funds with how that funding gets applied. But this particular funding is not designed to provide emergency shelter or support emergency shelter operating costs. And it's not intended to be provided for any form of construction, rehabilitation of any kind of shelter.
Okay, and my last question is back to the original one, is that between now and September, everything is kind of on the table from the social network agencies out there wanting to think maybe for this and maybe for that. Our council offices and others can also do it. Community groups can also do it. So you'll get a robust amount of desire for the money.
Right.
And then who will make the decision where the $29.4 million goes? Do we here as a committee and a council, or how does that happen?
I think there's a very collaborative process where we'll come back with program designs and recommendations on that, and I'm not quite sure exactly how the approval process occurs, but I think what we're planning on doing is meeting with our colleagues, developing concrete program designs and recommendations, and then coming back through the appropriate discussion and approval process.
And the 29.4 is for the city of Los Angeles or for the county?
It's for the city. The county, so what's interesting is that each jurisdiction that gets an ESG aliquot will receive funding. So county-wide, there is $58 million of this money that's coming in. The county, through its 44 opt-in cities and unincorporated areas, will have $12 million. And then the other funding is distributed throughout jurisdictions that receive direct HUD aliquots throughout the county. So we're working with about 18 cities on similar kinds of programs to try and figure out how to get it out there quickly, how to utilize existing infrastructure, and how to provide the most benefit to anyone who's either in danger of homelessness or is actually homeless now.
Thank you.
Councilmember Meg Barkley with the CLA's office. It would also be our recommendation that the LAHSA and the LAHD be instructed to return to council with the final program design for approval and any ultimate contracting recommendations.
Thank you.
Move that.
Okay, yeah, second. For the city to continue to make progress on getting folks into permanent housing, and given the fact that we're facing a vast reduction in Section 8 housing vouchers, obviously we need to use these federal rapid rehousing resources. So I want to report back from LAHSA, LAHD, and HACLA. I don't know when our next meeting will be, Meg. If we picked another date yet?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Well, let's shoot for May? Okay, next 30 days, roughly, on the efficacy of doing this and how we can best implement our own programs. I would also like to see some of the HPRP funding going towards helping people with disabilities access or avail themselves of SSI and SDI income, so they have an income source to be able to use to pay rent, and some indication of whether or not this is an allowable activity. Again, for the departments to report back on how the city's HPRP effort could enhance those efforts. And then if LAHSA can report back to us on what the county is going to be doing for long-term rental subsidies for CalWorks families. Families living at the lowest level of income, 30% AMI and below, and these are the families that we are seeing in Skid Row and South Los Angeles and all points here and far, basically, at this point. And if you need notes for the report, you can obviously get it again from staff. Now, with respect to eviction prevention, as the HPRP funding for prevention is not a general eviction prevention program, but rather, this is like a tongue twister, an eviction prevention program for households who would otherwise be literally homeless, is there a way of identifying neighborhoods in which currently homeless people lived in before they became homeless, so we can target this funding in a strategic manner? And you may not, if you can't answer that today, that can be as part of the report back. Yeah.
I know that we've been doing some my name is Leslie Wise. I'm sorry, I'm the director of policy at LAHSA. We've been doing some research on best practices and programs across the country that are doing prevention and rapid rehousing programming. And there is some evidence out of New York, particularly, that tracks people who are currently homeless and asks where they come from, so that the city of New York, in this case, can do some targeted outreach to prevent additional people from becoming homeless in those specific areas. So I think there's some learning that we can do to make sure that we're using these funds kind of most appropriately and strategically in the city of Los Angeles.
Okay, great. I would have.
Right, and the other thing that we're speaking of, we've as a partnership, is using the research that the city agencies already have, LHD, LAHSA, et cetera, and doing mapping and overlaying of targeted areas within the city in greatest need, areas, high poverty areas, areas that LAHD has mapped, highest concentrations of foreclosure. LAHSA has additional mapping capacity right now to map services delivered in various parts of the cities. And with those overlays, I think we'll be able to bring back in May a justification for how these funds should be used throughout the city of LA.
Okay, so we're looking for better integration of this information with the NSP program, and I know that housing has done extensive mapping on foreclosures too.
Right.
So I think that'll be.
Those are the maps I speak of, yes.
Oh, yeah, all interrelated. Okay. Okay, any other, did I miss anything?
No, it's great.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Oh, wait, we have a card on item 1, but thank you for the staff. And Mr. Jeff Dronkers from the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank.
Good afternoon. Homelessness and food have always gone hand in hand, and I just wanted to make some comments on food insecurity in Los Angeles County. from 2008, our food pantry network of 300 served 150,000 people. In January of 2009, that same network served 210,000 people, an uptick of about 36%. If it weren't for increased donations of fresh fruits and vegetables and for actually funding from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act coming from the federal government in terms of federal commodities, and actually an RFP currently on the way for FEMA funding, the food bank wouldn't be able to get by. A lot of what we're hearing is food bags that are being distributed currently are significantly less than what they were last year, and that food pantries that are open for 4 or 5 times a week, where a client could go, 2 or 3 times a month to receive some food, are only able to access food basically once over the span of that month. In food bank circles, we talk about this as a disaster. When a natural disaster or a man-made disaster comes our way, it's kind of predictable. We know we're going to see a spike in what we do for the next month or so, and then kind of a downclick in the next 4 to 6 weeks or 4 to 6 months. For something like this, we've never seen anything like this before. I mean, we saw a quick uptick in last spring, and we don't know if we've hit the height of where we're supposed to be yet. We're still seeing an increase. Preliminary numbers in February and March have shown that there has been an increase. And so we'll see what we can do, but I did want to make the offer to the City Council and to this committee. If there's anything that the food bank can do to help out in your districts, please let us know. Thank you very much.
And I think I was approached by an engineering group that wants to donate the proceeds of its paper yacht challenge.
Thank you.
To your organization, and check with Michael and make sure they nailed that down.
Definitely. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
And just on that too, Madam Chair, I know that we specifically lobbied FEMA to have the food banks get direct allocation. I think that $1.4 million that they approved to do that, and we'll continue to use that as we go to Washington and as we talk to local officials to see if we can continue to make that connection and lobby for it. But
yeah, no, thank you. I mean, we did legislative visits in D.C. in February, and everyone's extremely positive, and everyone, knows of what's happening in Los Angeles, which is very positive.
Yeah.
That's half the battle for us. We don't even have to make that battle. Our 50-minute visit just basically talking about our programs and how it goes around. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Hey, Ruth.
I just wanted to follow up on Councilman Garcetti, Ruth Schwartz, Shelter Partnership, and I'm on the local board. And I just wanted to tell you that motion was very important. And, that the local board, which is really volunteers in the community for the most part, about 20, 25 people sit on that. They were very respectful and taken by the fact that the council wanted to go on record. And, for us to generally what happens, just to give you a context, is half the money from the local board goes to food and half goes to shelter. In this case, what went forward was 70% is going to food. Okay, and of that, half of it's going to the 5 food banks that qualify. So that's a huge infusion because we felt that it would really leverage, and we felt that there was a real opportunity, and to follow the direction of the LA City Council on this action. And I don't think I've been on the board since I've been with Shelter Partnership, and I won't say how long that is, but that's the first time I can recall actually getting a motion from this council. So I think that, to the extent we can work together, and also some of the things that you all wanted around fresh fruit and other things were prioritized in this NOFA, and that's never happened before. So the extent which we can share information, it will be received well by the local board. So I want to thank you for taking interest and taking leadership on this.
Thank you. All right, so that will conclude item 1. I think we're going on to item 2 now.
Go ahead.
That seemed logical.
Oh, we could go 6.
Item 2 is a presentation by Skid Row Housing Trust relative to Project 50.
Okay, just a couple of introductory remarks. We're going to talk about Project 50. This is a Los Angeles County program that began last year and focused on 50 chronically homeless individuals on Skid Row and moved them from chronic on-the-street homelessness into housing with an intensive wraparound service program. Now, Skid Row Housing Trust and the nonprofit Common Ground, along with other County of Los Angeles services, were selected by Supervisor Yaroslavsky for this project. Molly Reisman is here on behalf of Skid Row Housing Trust, and believe there's a okay, Flora Gil-Krisaloff is here on behalf of the supervisor, and Mike is here on behalf of the trust. So let's see who's missing.
I think we're all here.
Common ground?
Beth wanted to be here but had an emergency that came up and she couldn't join us.
Okay, well, okay. Let me just say this. I've made it known through my chief of staff to everybody involved in this project, Project 50, that, and I think I said it at the Abbey Apartments, I really wish it could have been projects thousands, but I guess 50 is a place to start. But that I really felt that it was very, very important that since I have the largest homeless shelter in the city, that the clients out of New Image needed to be considered in this process if we're going to discuss the possibility of any expansion of services in Skid Row. So I want to thank the Trust and Shelter Partnership for the work that they have done to make this housing connection finally happen, to be able to feed New Image clients into permanent supportive housing as they became ready to be housed at what is, I think, an absolutely gorgeous project, the Abbey Apartments. So, I just have to say thank you because I think that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Okay? If you really mean what we say about providing a continuum of care and not just having boutique programs that are not leveraged and interconnected with other programs to provide a stream of housing for people in need. And I'm sorry if this sounds like a bit of a soapbox, but it really did aggravate me at the very beginning that we couldn't get that done, but I'm happy that we're there now. So, with that, Molly or Mike, you want to start?
I think Molly will make the comments today.
Yes, I'll do the presentation. And I did provide packets for each of the committee members. The front is a newsletter, which we can also distribute to the audience. I don't have packets for all of the audience, but we do have the newsletter, which has the front there as a profile of one of the Project 50 participants, which helps you understand. Our last presentation was talking about one end of the homeless spectrum. Project 50 targeted the other, the really long-term homeless. You also have a PowerPoint that the county has prepared on Project 50. I did a timeline, and there's also a budget sort of cheat sheet that has the budget numbers, because I know there's going to be some questions about that. With that, I'm Molly Reisman with Skid Row Housing Trust. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to present Project 50 and our experiences with the project and what it's meant to our organization and how it's changed our work, because it has changed our approach to how we do things to some extent. I'll provide a little background on the trust, the street-to-home model that this is based on, Project 50, and talk about lessons learned. Real quickly, the Skid Row Housing Trust is a nonprofit that was formed in 1989 with the belief that Skid Row had been a residential community for over 100 years, and we wanted to preserve it as a residential community and provide high-quality housing that the people in the community could afford, that would provide them safe and comfortable housing options in their own community. We quickly learned in our work, we started building housing and rehabbing housing in the community, and we quickly learned that housing isn't truly permanent when you're trying to provide permanent housing for people who are homeless unless it's coupled with services. The people moving into our housing, and this is what we were learning in the early 90s, had many issues they were struggling with: substance abuse, mental illness, physical disease. And so what we call our second generation of buildings that we started in the early 90s, we developed with a focus on case management, thinking this is Skid Row, there's lots of services, we'll provide case management, and the case managers will refer out to this plethora of services in the community. That helped, and we found that our residents were more stable in housing after we included case management, but we found that there were a lot of people in Skid Row who were the long-term homeless, who had been on the streets a long time, had very complex health issues, multiple overlapping disabilities, and that case management wasn't enough, that they were being turned away or not served sufficiently by a lot of the services in the community, because our existing homeless service delivery system is very fragmented. And so if you're dealing with a co-occurring substance abuse addiction and mental health issue, it's very hard to get either of those addressed when you go only to a mental health agency or only to a substance abuse agency. So in 2001, we started looking at, well, how can we integrate services? We have this fragmented system. We're doing permanent housing. We want people to stay in our permanent housing for a long period of time, and we want to serve the people who really need to get off the streets the most, who've been there the longest. We were lucky enough, we started looking at that model in 2001, and we're lucky enough in 2003 to get a federal grant, the Chronic Homeless Initiative grant, to do that integrated model in housing, which is the St. George, which I know both of you are quite familiar with, where we were finally able to integrate services on site, where we could provide an integrated model of substance abuse treatment, primary health care, mental health treatment, case management. We learned that we needed to have benefits, that they were a critical part of that mix, because that was the only way you could achieve sustainability, is if people could get SSI so that they could get Medi-Cal and so that you could bill for those services, because we knew that people were going to need services over the long term. So that's just a little background on the trust and sort of where we were when we were approached by the county to participate in Project 50. Project 50 was based on Common Ground's model, the street to home model. I passed out the map that shows all the different cities where they're using the vulnerability index. It's different than traditional outreach because it uses Jim O'Connell's research from Boston. Jim O'Connell's a wonderful doctor who's done great research on the homeless and their health issues to target those who are most likely to die on the streets in the next 7 years. And so the vulnerability index you use to survey everyone who's on the streets and figure out who's been there the longest, who is the sickest, who has those multiple overlapping diseases. Instead of just saying, this is our office and this is the program we have, we're going to open it up to anybody who's chronically homeless, you really go out and use the vulnerability index to target people by name and face. It provides a level of accountability that we had certainly never been involved in before, where it's very clear who you're targeting because you know them by name and by face using the vulnerability index. The other piece of street to home is you use that research then to do your outreach and get people immediately into housing very quickly. For the chronically homeless, the traditional continuum model is very challenging to navigate. It's very easy. The traditional continuum of going shelter to transitional housing to permanent housing, it's very easy to fail in that system and end up right back where you started, and that's why we end up with chronically homeless people who've been on the streets for decades at a time sometimes, because they just keep going through the cycle and never getting to that place of permanent housing. So street to home, the focus was a housing first approach. Get people into housing immediately. Once you have them stable in housing, then you can address their disabilities, and then they can really thrive and stay in permanent housing, and you know that their homelessness has been ended. So that's the street to home model. So Project 50 was based on the street to home model, and the problem that the reason why we needed to have Project 50 is because we had so many long-term chronically homeless individuals in Skid Row. And many of these, as I was saying, many of these individuals had not been served by the homeless service delivery system that was in place, or were not effectively being served. Just to give you some example, the average length of homelessness for Project 50 participants was 10 years, and with some of our participants, it was decades. Mr. Givens, who's on the front of our newsletter, was homeless for close to 30 years. And he was using services. He was going to detox, he was going to the ER, he was going to jail, and just over and over and over again, and just stuck in that cycle. Which was very expensive for the county, and he wasn't effectively being served. On the services side, we now know that 91% of our participants in Project 50 have a mental illness. Prior to entering the program, only 4% had accessed DMH services previously. These are people who were on the street, the services were there, but they weren't effective enough to serve this population because of the complexity of all their multiple overlapping disabilities. On the housing side, the applications to get into housing were just much too onerous. It's really hard to get into permanent housing because we're using so many different funding sources. We've got TCAC regulations on the capital side. We've got housing authority regulations on the subsidy side. You have to get a disability certificate. You have to get a chronic homeless letter. You have to get a homelessness certification. You have to have your TB status, your ID. I mean, it was just too onerous for these individuals to get into permanent housing, and so they weren't effectively being served. So Project 50 was created to identify the 50 most chronic individuals using the vulnerability index who were sleeping on Skid Row and place them into housing. Phase 1 was the vulnerability index, phase 2 was the placement into housing, and phase 3 was retaining them in housing, which was really the trust's role. We provided the 50 housing units for these individuals. So I want to focus on what was critical about this program and what was different about this, because we'd done the Skid Row Collaborative previously. We'd been very involved in trying to focus on the most vulnerable, but we'd never been as effective in Project 50, and it's for 4 reasons. One, because of the collaboration involved with Project 50. We had been able to do the Skid Row Collaborative with a federal grant, but our local partners hadn't really been there. Project 50 brought together 24 private and public local partners, including the trust, including the sheriff's office, LAPD, numerous nonprofits like JWCH and D.D. Hirsch, the county agencies that we really needed at the table, the Department of Health Services, the Department of Mental Health, the Department of Public Health, which oversees alcohol and drug programs. All of these individuals, also LASA and the VA, were all at the table to make this happen. And when you're talking about the chronic homeless, you need that collaboration or you're not going to be effective. And so there was really effective collaboration with this program. Secondly, by targeting the most vulnerable by name and by photograph, there was this level of accountability that I was talking about. There is a natural tendency to want people to be successful in your program. And because of that, it's very hard, even if we at the senior level of the trust say we want to target the most vulnerable, it's very hard to get our line staff to really target that person who can barely walk through the door. Because they just feel like this person's going to fail, it's going to be a negative experience all around. When you target people by name and by photograph, there is this level of accountability, and you have to serve these people, and these are the people you have to get in, no matter how hard they are, no matter how severe their disability, no matter how bad their addiction, you have to help them. And that was a very unique experience for us, and I really felt like we were serving people we had not served before, even though we had a housing first philosophy and did try and target the most vulnerable. Thirdly, the integration of services was just so deep in this program. By having Department of Health, by having Department of Mental Health, by having alcohol and drug programs all at the table, we were able to serve people much more effectively. And now, so those 91% of participants who had never, or most of them had never engaged in DMH services, they're now getting mental health treatment. But it's because that their mental health treatment, their psychiatrist, is working very closely with their substance abuse provider and their primary doctor. It provided this level of integration that these people would not have been able to be helped if they had had to navigate that fragmented system. Thirdly, and this point doesn't get emphasized a lot about Project 50, there's a very heavy emphasis on sustainability. And I think we're actually closer in this project to reaching sustainability than anything we've ever done locally before in terms of services and housing. Because for the first time, we have done primary health care billing. We work very closely with a federally qualified health clinic that can bill Medi-Cal for the health services we provide in housing. But for the first time, we've gotten DMH to the table to help facilitate the mental health billing as well. And because of that, I think we're much closer to sustainability, because you need to be billing both in terms of having sustainability of services in housing. We had never had that before, and we had been trying to get DMH to the table, but it just hadn't happened. We needed that political will that the supervisor's office brought to the table to bring them in to help us do that billing in housing. And so there's a very heavy emphasis on sustainability. I know on the health side, there's projections that the health services will be sustainable in 6 to 12 months. I was not able to get from DMH when they project the mental health services to be sustainable, but I know that they're increasing visits and billing, and that the contract in the first year allowed up to $230,000 of billing for mental health services through Medi-Cal. We want this to be sustainable. We want to use the mainstream resources to pay for it. And I think this project's much closer to getting there than anything we had ever done before. It built on the model of the SRC, the Skid Row Collaborative, but it just took it to a level that we weren't going to get to otherwise on our own because it brought the county family in. And I should also say the Housing Authority is a very close partner in this project, and we were able to move people into housing faster than we ever had before. Our median time from point of first initial contact to getting a participant in housing was 12 days. And, you know, normally it takes us a few months. So that was very impressive. And there was one occasion where we got someone in housing the first day we got in contact with them. And that was because the Housing Authority has been a really great partner in this. So just in terms of major lessons, I think I've covered most things here. You know, we had learned with the Skid Row Collaborative about integration, about the importance of having the medical and mental health home for residents on the same site as the housing. We'd learned about benefits, but with Project 50, we just did it in an even more effective way. And because the county's at the table and because of the supervisor's leadership, there's political will that we didn't have with the Skid Row Collaborative. There are some areas where there's room for improvement. I know on the veterans side, we have a lot more work to do. The VA was a partner, but we had, there's just been some challenges in really accessing veterans benefits. I believe at this point, none of our participants are accessing veterans benefits yet. It's, that piece is one of the areas that in the second year we really want to target in terms of room for improvement. The other area where there's a lot of room for improvement is law enforcement. LAPD was a partner, but we did lose a number of Project 50 participants to incarceration. These are individuals who have lots of interaction with the criminal justice system, and we think it's much more effective if we can get them into housing with services than trying to meet their needs through jail or prison, but we did lose some people there. So we think there's more work to be done on law enforcement. There's more work to be done on the benefits side. I believe about half our participants are on SSI now, but all of them should be eligible, and we should be getting to 100% at some point. That's our goal. So there's more work in the second year to do on benefits.
What did you say about prisons? I almost heard that sentence.
Well, I was saying one of the areas where there's room for improvement in the second year of this program, we finished the first year in February of this year. We're in our second year, is on the law enforcement side. We've lost a number of individuals to jail and prison, which is not particularly effective because these are very sick individuals. Not only are you going to have your normal jail and prison costs, you're going to have a lot of health care costs for these individuals. And, you know, they generally were being arrested. A lot of it was drug use. Not for selling, not for things like that, but just they're addicts. And so they get arrested, and they have multiple offenses before, and a number of them have ended up in prison.
They in that permanent housing at the time they get arrested, or?
Some it was before we got them in permanent housing, some it was after, because it takes, you know, it's a housing first approach. So you're trying to get someone in housing, it takes a few months to stabilize them. And so we did lose a couple people after they've moved into housing. The other area where there's room for improvement that you've already talked about is incorporating our shelters in the community. This was very focused on people who were sleeping on the streets. We know in terms of the expanding this program, we really need to focus on individuals in our shelters because of the dearth of permanent housing resources in the community and how unaffordable most housing is. We have a lot of people who are stuck in our shelters for a long period of time, and that's not the point of the shelter system. We want to have people, it's an emergency intervention, and we want to quickly get them out of shelters into permanent housing. And so we need to be working closely in doing the vulnerability index in shelters. And lastly, as you've talked about, we need to move beyond pilot programs. This was a demonstration. It was a very important demonstration, and I think the county was effectively able to serve a population that they had really struggled with previously. Now the lesson has been learned, and now we need to focus on how do we get beyond demonstration. There's been multiple county programs that are really important that have been demonstrations. The Access to Housing and Health, which focused on the frequent flyers in the ERs, the Skid Row Families Demonstration Project, all which have focused on how do you serve a tough population and move them quickly into housing. But they've all been demonstrations, and I think the next step is how do we move beyond that into making this a long-term program. So next steps, there is a proposal to expand Project 50 to Project 500. The board letter on that is expected at the supervisors meeting on May 12th, I believe. And there's cost avoidance study being done on the program to look at how much money this is saving the county, which will hopefully help us make the argument that you should redirect more funds into this program. So,
Any other comments?
Yeah. I'm Flora Gill Krisloff, and I'm Supervisor Yaroslavsky's deputy on homelessness and mental health, and I really want to thank Molly for doing such a comprehensive overview on Project 50. To sit here and reflect on, it was last December 2007 when I sat there and wrote the very lengthy motion for the supervisor to put forth to the board to move $3.5 million for Project 50. And it was real touch and go the whole way because just was no certainty that the board would be willing to set aside $3.5 million of general funds. And at that point, it was $5 million. We knew that was way too high, and we scaled it down to 3.5. And I have to say that the most significant thing, and Molly's touched on this, but I want to reiterate it, the most significant thing that has caused the success is the close collaboration between the City of Los Angeles, LAHSA, and the county. Without those three entities, agreeing to come together and sit together at the table, and then through that process to bring 24 agencies, and if you look in the handout that Molly gave you, this is the PowerPoint from our presentation on page 5. It shows the 24 agencies, including the sheriff, including probation, including LAPD, the mayor's office, the courts, the public defender, public counsel.
I'm not sure it's in the packet. I'm sorry. I used the briefer.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, we don't need to go through the whole list.
Fine, but
we get it.
That is the ongoing challenge, is making sure all these disparate entities, and you hear about the silos in the county, and because of the categorical streams of funding that fund these agencies, they are not used to then thinking about how they leverage off of each other, coordinate. For example, one of the biggest problems we had starting off just in the outreach phase was seeing how DPSS, the Department of Mental Health, the Department of Health, Department of Public Health could communicate and share information because each of them have different regulations. So in the end, it took days and days of going to our county council and having them set up a release form that was many, many pages to cover all the different entities. So yes, 50 people. When the supervisor said we're going to start with Project 50, it was like, well, what's 50? With the 70,000 homeless folks out there. But he was so correct in that gave us a chance to do some real system changing and paradigm shifting. And it's a 2-year demonstration project, given the success after the first year, especially because we were able to show that for the first year, that the people, the 50, were on the streets. It actually cost more for them to be on the streets than to be moved into housing because of cycling through the emergency rooms, the hospitals, and the jail systems and the justice system. And we didn't even capture all of the expenses like ambulances and those types of things. There'll be a full study after 2 years. So because of the success after the first year, the supervisor now does want to scale up to 500, and his hope is, as you say, Ms. Perry, to go to Project 4,000, Project 5,000. I mean, he'll just keep adding zeros.
Well,
But the collaboration is really, really important.
I want to talk about
appreciate it.
locations and for expansion, and that it goes beyond downtown. I know Mr. Garcetti has great needs. I know Mr. Rosendahl has great needs, and actually, given the economy, there are great needs all over the city and extensively in Supervisor Yaroslavsky's district and all the supervisors' districts, and maybe we can use this as an opportunity to overcome people's biases and prejudices, because now there are people who are homeless who had not been anticipating that they would ever be homeless before, so the definition of homelessness has been broadened. So, Molly, I guess you're speaking for Common Ground today, too, then?
I'll do the best I can.
Okay, do the best you can. The overall cost per client, have they been calculated by Project 50, and were healthcare costs included in that calculation?
Yeah, so in your packet, I included a budget sheet. It's one of the last. It's just a single page that goes over the costs. I may not have left one for myself,
okay.
But I can give you in, right. I can give you in broad numbers. So it turned out that the actual cost of the program in the first year, it's this page, was much less than we expected. It was about $1.1 million in the first year. Of that, a portion of it was MHSA. It was not County General Fund. It was the Mental Health Services Act. And honestly, a lot of the costs on the mental health side are prescription drugs for people to get treatment. We found that was a very high cost. The actual there was also a lot of startup costs. So on that page, the budget page, if we take out the startup costs, the operating costs were about $540,000 per year for that first year, which when you divide by 50 comes out to $10,800 per individual,
Now,
which is pretty
Can you
Cheap.
compare that cost to the overall cost of what we are now doing by moving people from New Image to Shelter Plus into places like the Abbey?
The Abbey has a similar cost per person in terms of services. This is on the services side. It doesn't include the housing subsidy, but we were lucky enough to benefit from the county's housing and homelessness prevention or program fund. I may not be calling it the right thing. And the Abbey has integrated services on site for the individuals.
Yeah,
from
maybe
the
it's apples and oranges, but what I'm trying to get to is we're comparing and contrasting the Housing First model, which is straight from the street into wraparound, versus from the street to emergency, transitional into permanent.
Yeah.
And with the common ground model fitting in there.
I think that there's no right approach. I think that when you talk about Housing First means you do not screen anyone out. You screen people in, whether they're coming from the streets, whether they're coming from shelter, whether they're coming from transitional housing. You simply don't screen people out because they haven't gone through a certain number of hoops.
But here's the difference. Now we have this demonstration project. We've got something under our belt. Now we're talking about an expansion. Okay, so this is where we begin to perhaps broaden our view on that, is now we've learned some lessons. And you know how intensely concerned I was about being able to take people through the continuum, and how pleased I am to have them now end up in the Abbey, and hopefully other places like that, and hopefully not only throughout the city, but throughout the county, which is a much larger conversation, and we haven't achieved that goal yet in the county of Los Angeles. We still haven't achieved that, with so many cities being out of compliance with basic state housing element requirements. So tell me a little bit, if you can, I don't know if you can, but the criteria under discussion to determine locations for the expansion of this project. Because we have great need in Skid Row, that's well documented. Councilman Garcetti has great need in Hollywood, Venice too. But again, and I keep saying this and I feel like I'm screaming into the wind, that there's more than 3 places in the city and many, many more locations in the county of Los Angeles where if we decide to discuss expansion in a meaningful way, I'm going to push pretty hard for that. Because I'm not going to be like a dog chasing my tail and pretending like things are just occurring down here and nowhere else.
Yeah, I'm going to let Flora respond to that because she actually knows about expansion much deeper.
Well,
So what's the criteria?
Well, the expansion is actually a motion from Supervisor Yaroslavsky on the heels of the one-year presentation. And besides his dedication to permanent supportive housing and serving the chronic vulnerable through this vulnerability index approach, he is really strongly pushing regionalization because he has the city.
Let me just stop you right there.
Yeah.
Because we've heard that before, and you know that we've heard that before because what was that money that, the supervisors set aside for regional care centers? What was it?
You're talking about the stabilization
Yeah,
center.
stabilization centers.
Right.
Okay, regional
Well,
approach
that was
didn't really pan out.
Well, that was a huge fiasco, and what happened was stabilization centers were, there was such pushback on the concept that
But you're going to have pushback on this too. That's nothing's changed except
I
that
can
maybe, let me just finish this. Nothing has changed except for the fact that there are more people who are homeless now who may not necessarily be mentally ill. They are actually homeless because they've lost their jobs, or they've basically fallen out of some sort of a structured situation. Prior to that, I would say that the higher percentage of people that we were dealing with, especially, and I would use Hollywood and downtown and possibly Venice, are people who are mentally ill. Now it's different.
Well, what I wanted to share with you, I can't speak for the other supervisors, but in the 3rd district, that is the supervisor's goal, is to be building capacity throughout the district because he has Venice and Santa Monica. And those are 2 saturated areas similar to Skid Row. And in fact, he isn't waiting for that board letter, to come back to say whether it's feasible or not to expand. He is already expanding. Santa Monica, pretty much after Project 15 launched, a couple months later, they made a commitment to do the service registry, and they're serving 130 chronic vulnerable, and supervisor has funded 70 of those people to move from street to home. We just the board just approved for Venice with St. Joseph Center in Councilman Rosendal's district with his assistants.
So
40
if you
people.
can break it down for me, what's the criteria that is going to be used to determine locations for the expansion of this project? Just tell me that.
Yeah, at this point, it's really a partnership. It's who is interested in stepping up to serve the chronic vulnerable.
Okay,
Which communities?
so-
West Hollywood has come up before.
So there's no established criteria, basically. It's like
It's if you
volunteer.
Because we're not going to push people to do it. It's still piloting. It's still a demonstration
that's the problem.
project.
And I have to tell you, this is the huge gap in logic, because St. Joseph, God bless them, I mean, this is their mission forever, and you have so many nonprofits in Hollywood who do the same, but if we wait for organizations to volunteer, first of all, they don't have any money now. People are all running out of, their donor base is shrinking rapidly, and they're heavily relying on federal funding opportunities. But I'm going to ask my staff to work on a motion on that particular issue, because that to me is a gap in logic, and I think we need to close that gap. If we're going to have a discussion, this is my opportunity. If we're going to have a discussion about possibility of expansion, I'm going to take this opportunity to close the gap in that logic, because I'm not willing to sit around another 4 years and wait for organizations to willingly participate,
Well-
because there will be only a few who will.
Well, at this point, the CEOs is working on the letter to the board, but it looks like they have a number over 500 that are interested in participating. I got a call from Pomona yesterday, Natalie Profant-Camuro. I know that PATH is interested in Long Beach. And as I said, in our district, the replication has occurred in Santa Monica, that's outside of the city of LA, in San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center. They're going to replicate 30. Venice, and the neighborhood council actually sent a letter of support for St. Joseph's to do the replication. And so at this point, it's matching up. It's matching up the resources.
But those are not the people who ultimately vote to make the commitment on behalf of those municipalities to be able to do that. And it seems to me we still got a long way to go. Anyway, I'm going to prepare a motion, and I'll circulate it to my colleagues on that point. Okay.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you all for the presentation and for the great work, and congrats to everybody on the progress that's been made and the model that's developed. I think that's really, really important work. I'm going to start parochial and has some larger issues as well. We would love to participate with Project 500 in Hollywood. I know West Hollywood has some homeless. There's been a larger concentration. It's a more complex concentration. But criteria that I think are of interest to you and of interest to us certainly are in place. We have people who want to do this. We appreciate you going to one of the meetings as well of the group, the Hollywood Forward group. We've got great partnership. I mean, the number of groups. We've got capacity in those partners, which is unique too. And we've started, we did an informal kind of registry, and we have a commitment to doing a more formal registry right now. And we have some infrastructure. I think we've shown a willingness, working with the mayor's office and others, our former CRA regional head, who's in the audience now, working with the mayor to do permanent supportive housing. We even had great legislative deputies who moved on to some of our nonprofits before us. But we'd love to move on that, and we'd love to be there. In some ways, it's a more complex area, because I think the vulnerability index is a great index. It also is somewhat, and I don't mean this in a bad way, discriminatory against people who are going to cost us a lot of money later in their lives because they happen to be younger They just don't have the history yet of the number of visits. We had a whole committee hearing in Hollywood at the Gay and Lesbian Center on youth homeless. And because they're not yet there, they wouldn't necessarily be seen as vulnerable because they're probably not as likely to die. But we had a 31-year-old who just died on the streets of Hollywood who was homeless a month ago. I'm very concerned about making sure that we hit them, and that I haven't seen the business community in 8 years working with them and the provider community come together so coherently. We had visits. Phil Mangano came out and did his soft shoe in Hollywood, and he was excited about it. But we want to have that county-city cooperation really closely and evolve the model too, because while what's going to work in Skid Row is going to work well and maybe more replicable in parts of Santa Monica, for instance, in Hollywood it's not a very different population, but parts of that population are quite different. But we think we've got the nuance with the providers that are there to be able to do a piece of that. So to let us know, how we can move on that, and we've stepped up with funding. We'll continue to look for stepping up with funding, but even like the scattered sites piece that we did too, we're able to go out to people, and somebody who cost us, we estimated $300,000 in 1 month of emergency room visits we had for $800 in housing. Now, we need the services. It's not going to be $800 for the services, but it's going to be a lot cheaper than that month that preceded it. So we know we can get bang for buck, and we think there are a few places as fertile and ready to go. So as you look at that expansion, while you build up in other areas, we're ready to go and to be your partner. So let us know what we can do. And as we look at how this can be replicated, I think we can all be part of a political coalition here to the point of the chair, that in areas, for instance, that Supervisor Yaroslavsky doesn't represent, or areas where there has been traditional pushback, we always have people of good heart and goodwill, and we've got a lot of people who are interested. But we can kind of do with Supervisor Yaroslavsky and others. Ed Reyes has been very good at this, some of the peer-to-peer shaming, for lack of a better way of putting it, to make sure that political leadership gets behind this, whether that's our peers, whether that's peers on the County Board of Supervisors, or whether that's elected officials at the city level and other cities in the county, because this can only work if we really pull that out. And I think the funding will only come through at the national level too, to some degree, if we can show this as something that's scalable, not just with the adding of the zero, which is exactly what we want to do too, but showing how it can adapt to families, it can adapt to families, it can adapt to youth, it can adapt to gay and lesbian homeless, it can adapt to a whole host of, a very, very heterogeneous population. And I know that we had to do this first and show that it can work with one before we can go out to another. But we're ready. The Get Love has been doing some training in Hollywood as well for the index piece. I want to develop some sort of a youth vulnerability index, and maybe we can even talk to the folks who put together the first vulnerability index, because it's not so much who's most likely to die, but the nice thing about county cooperation too is we can add DCFS to that too, because as you've been following, so many of the kids that are homeless in Hollywood are just coming right out of the foster care system, as we know. And as the Speaker Bass looks at increasing the age to 21, where people can stay in that foster care system, that's really where we have a chance of not investing in a whole new generation of 40, 50, 60-something-year-olds that are just going to be scattered around the city, costing a lot of money and dying. Thanks.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 3.
Item number 3 is a presentation by LASA relative to the 2009-2010 budget.
We are going to take keep them confused. Exactly what he just said. Okay.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Steve Andrzejewski. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of LASA. This year, LASA is planning on managing a budget of approximately $70 million, $30 million of which is going to come from HUD through their supportive housing program. And we have additional budgets through the city and the county of Los Angeles. This year, our budget from the city and the county of Los Angeles come in two pieces, through the consolidated plan and through the GCP. Through the consolidated plan, we receive about $12 million, $9 million in CDBG funding, and $3.1 in ESG funding. And the remaining amount that we get from the city is through the GCP process. Our GCP budget request for this year was $11.3 million. I have...
What was the response?
The budget came out yesterday, and we, through the city and the county, through the city, our city general fund budget was increased last year to $10.7 million. And we put in additional asks. None of the additional asks were funded, and we were, from the 6.7, we were cut about $32,000. Those funds will go to funding, basically maintaining the programs that were funded this past year. In addition to those funds, through the supportive housing program Supernova process this year, our HMIS program was awarded an additional $400,000. So one of the additional asks through the general fund budget was for additional cash match. Now, HUD does, when HUD provides funding for a program, they ask for local support of up to 20%. And traditionally, the city and the county have provided the cash match for these services. The increase of $400,000 requires an increase to our cash match. That $32,000 will allow LASA to accept the additional $400,000 from the supportive housing program for HMIS. We are grateful to the City of Los Angeles for the increase to our baseline budget. This past year, the increase of about $3.8 million has greatly enhanced the programs that the general fund budget serves. Most notably, the year-round shelter program. The increase in funding last year allowed LASA to increase the permanent beds at the New Image shelter by 170 beds. It also allowed for an increase of a cost of living increase for all of our 11 year-round shelter programs, as well as adding case management. Now, we feel it's very important that to add the case management to these programs, because case management allows these emergency overnight shelters to really be to become a portal into our continuum of care. And in addition to the year-round program, the increased funding allowed us to maintain 199 emergency shelter beds that the council added to our portfolio several years ago. And these are 199 beds that are provide services throughout the city of Los Angeles, and these are 24-hour emergency shelter beds.
Okay. Got it? All right. You want to add to that?
I'll just talk very briefly about the homeless management information system. Because our continuum, I'm Mike Arnold, the Chief Operating Officer for LASA. In about 2002, HUD mandated that jurisdictions implement a homeless management information system, and it is a information gathering system that gathers information about the demographics, program participation, and then outcomes relative to every individual or household that receives services within the continuum of care. So it's a great tool, and they've provided some funding to do that. Because our continuum is so large, it has taken some time to actually get enough critical mass out there in terms of participants using the system to make the information both useful and valuable to us when we look at planning what we need to do both regionally, locally, and really throughout the continuum. So we're delighted that HUD increased the amount of funding that's available. One of the things that we were able to do this year was implement all of the emergency shelters, all of the winter shelters on the HMIS system. And while there's still going through, I think, first year cleanup relative to implementation of a new data system. We will be coming back to you with, I think, some very interesting information about who uses those shelters and where they go once they're in those shelters as they move through. So, and what made that process available was that we developed swipe cards that would allow individuals to go into the shelter and just swipe rather than go through a lengthy intake process, which had made the process impossible in the past.
Oh, I know.
So we're actually reaching a point with the use of this system that I think is going to yield great benefit to us as at the city level and the continuum level, and I look forward to bringing that information back to you.
Great. Okay. Anything you want to add?
Okay, said it all.
Okay, very good. I'd just like a report back from LASA and the CAO on the status of the agency's administrative allowance for continuum of care and whether the agency is getting and able to make use of this resource. If not, why not? Let us know in this report back for our next meeting, because I think one of the greatest ongoing challenges for LASA is having enough administrative money. So that never changes.
And I do have to say a thanks to the entire City Council and the Mayor for increasing our administrative funding 2 years ago. What that has allowed us to do is really improve our infrastructure, and it's allowed us to increase our financial staff. It's allowed us to increase our contract staff, our policy and planning staff, our IT infrastructure, and a couple main points. A couple of main benefits that has produced for us is last year, for the first time in over 5 years, we were able to both monitor both fiscally and programmatically all of our sub-provider agencies. And by doing that, it really allows us to manage the risk associated with these funds. It also it drew a line in the sand for us, because from that information, we really developed technical assistance training workshops for our agencies, both on the fiscal and the programmatic side. We understand that a lot of our agencies are very small. They're out there trying to do the right thing, and in most cases, they just don't have the capacity to maneuver around all of the strings that come with this funding. So I see it as my goal to really assist them in being able to do that so that they can focus on their time on serving their clients. Mm-hmm. So we're really proud of the workshops that we've developed. We will continue to refine them as we assess how our agencies are doing, and I really think that adds a cost benefit on how the city funds are utilized.
And I just wanted to say, just to add on to that, one of the things I think.
For the recording.
Rebecca Isaacs, Executive Director of LASA. One of the things I think that is so timely about the fact that we've developed this infrastructure is that providing this technical assistance is really, really important for these agencies as they're going into the hardest times I think we've experienced in a really, really long time. Mm-hmm. We're starting to see some real financial distress from some of the agencies. So we're really trying to track that and make sure that we can help them as much as possible, and we can see the first signs of trouble. I don't know how much you've heard about agencies just across the board having a lot of trouble, whether it's with following the regulations or payroll or all the different kinds of things we're hearing about. So I think the fact that we've really been working with the agencies to develop their capacity is at least sort of keeping them from the brink, and I hope it doesn't get any worse, but we're really keeping an eye out for that.
And I just want to mention that investments in LASA is a really good return, because for every dollar we receive in funding, over 90 cents of that goes direct to programs. Even though we've built administrative infrastructure, we have maintained that infrastructure cost at a very low rate. We are able to very rapidly develop RFPs, execute contracts, and get programs up and running, and it's at a very, very efficient rate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Any other comment, questions?
I do not.
Okay.
Just quickly, how much money are we talking about in the budget? Do you know?
The general service?
General services. The mayor's budget was released yesterday, and our budget came out at 10.1 plus an additional 500, so 10.6.
And how does that feel for your mission? that a step up, step down, the same?
As I stated to the
The
councilwoman.
mayor's staff just stepped out, so don't worry. You can give us the honest opinion.
It's a reduction. It's a reduction as compared to last year of $32,000.
32K, okay, thank you.
Yeah, considering the circumstances.
Yeah, that's not bad.
It's not bad.
Considering
Considering.
Talk to other
We
city
are
departments and
extremely grateful.
Half a
We are
billion
extremely
shortfall.
grateful.
just tell everybody it's 10%. Even if it's not.
Keep going.
That's what everybody else
Thank you.
faces.
Thank
No,
you
I
very much.
appreciate your work.
Okay, item 4 is our next item.
Get the money downstairs and quick run.
Item 4 is a report from LASA relative to utilization of the cold wet weather program.
Okay.
These were
So what's going on with Burbank?
What's happening, Burbank?
I'll let Dave
Apparently
tackle
they
that
don't-
one.
I don't know, what's the
They don't want-
problem?
They don't want anything in Burbank?
No. Well, they have something in Burbank
They
now.
want to shut it down?
No, I don't think they want to shut it. Is that what they want to do?
I can speak to that.
All right, why don't you start with that? Let's start with the
Sure.
exciting part.
Okay. Good afternoon, council members. My name is David Martell. I'm a contracts unit manager at LASA, and I have overseen the winter shelter program for the last 3 or 4 seasons. And I have a report on utilization, but I'll start with, as requested, Burbank and Glendale. So we have operated the winter shelter program, or contracted for operations of the winter shelter program in Glendale for many, many years. 2 years ago in the 2007-2008 season, going into the season, we were notified by the National Guard that that facility would not be available. It's an armory. And they offered an armory in Burbank to be made available instead of Glendale. So going into that season, we attended a city council meeting in Burbank. This was new to them. They were very supportive of having the shelter there, and we and actually the program was operated, I think, so much to their delight that they were very receptive to having it again this past season. So this past season was the second year in Glendale. There were changes, slight changes in the operation of the program. This is a bus in, bus out facility, as many of the armories are, to accommodate the community.
Yeah. Sure.
And the level of persons walking into the shelter had increased this year.
Had increased
this
in
year.
Glendale and Burbank, or just
So the way the program works, there's all the winter.
Both cities, or one or the other, or?
Well, it's only in
Only
Burbank.
in Burbank, okay.
So when the shelter was in Glendale, it was not a bus in, bus out system, because a lot of the homeless were already in Glendale. They walked to their. Having it in Burbank, we knew already there was going to be a population in Glendale that would need to get to Burbank. So the armory in Glendale became a pickup spot. We had another pickup spot in Burbank, and from those 2 pickup spots, everybody was bussed into the armory in Burbank. And so the first year there was very little foot traffic. Our operator, who is Imago, it's an arm of the Union Rescue Mission, they do allow folks that are working and can't make the bus stops to walk into the shelter, so that they don't have to choose between a job and the hours of the shelter. And also they have volunteers that come and help set up the shelter every night. One of the nuances about the armory facility is you have to set up 150 cots every night, take them down in the morning, so that a lot of the homeless clients really take ownership in the program by helping to set up with the program. And so those were the folks that were primarily walking in and out of the program.
Volunteers?
The volunteers and the people that were working.
Okay.
And I think the level of people that were on work passes had increased from one year to the next.
But weren't there still more people who were being bussed in than those who were working?
Yes, way more.
I mean, I would imagine there's way more people who are just homeless, period, and may not have a job than there are people who are trying to work their way out of homelessness. So perhaps a combination of people who were
Correct.
seen walking were volunteers and people who were working homeless?
Correct. That's correct.
But
And
still, that was not as high as the number of people who were being bussed in. Am I
that's
correct?
absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. And the increase at least anecdotally from Imago, was about 5 to 10 people in the first year, and that increased to about 25 to 30 people walking into the shelter in this past season. So I think in response to the increased foot traffic and definitely some other perceptions from the local neighborhood, concerns started being expressed about the shelter, not just to the shelter, but also to some of the Burbank's city council members. I think Imago worked very closely with the council members and some of the community, the concerned citizens, and changed some of their policies to mitigate the issues that the community was bringing forth. But there were some community hearings in which people discussed. I think some of the folks that were in opposition to or were concerned about what was happening, I think felt that the mitigating steps were helpful. I think there were others that no matter what Imago did, it wasn't going to satisfy the result. But what's happening going forward, we've already been alerted recently by the National Guard that there's a significant military deployment next year in Burbank. So that site's not going to be available anyhow, which means we would go back to Glendale, and that's what we're looking towards next season.
Okay.
So.
All right.
And I think for the most part, those armories tend to be a good trade-off. They're generally, the communities are not that separated. The homeless, again, by and large, between the two, Glendale has a larger homeless population, so from that standpoint, it probably makes sense to have the shelter in Glendale.
Okay.
So today's report is about this past season's winter shelter program, and what I've prepared for you today is a summary memo that lists each of the 13 shelters that were operated this past season. This past season had 13 shelters for a total of 1,660 beds, and you can see by the columns. Certainly, there were different size capacities at each of the 13 shelters, so they ranged from the largest shelter being 236 bed capacity in South Los Angeles to the smallest being 35 bed shelter in Lancaster. The middle column shows the occupancy for this past season, the 2008-2009 winter shelter season. And then the next column shows the occupancy for the 2007-2008 season. And the last column shows the change from the 2 seasons ago to this last season. And here's an extra copy. And so overall, this season showed an 88% occupancy, which was a 4% increase from the previous season. And you may recall that the shelters, the winter shelters house single adults. So when we're talking about occupancy, we're talking about the single adults that are accessing the program. We also have one component of the program is vouchers, particularly for families with children. And so this going into the season, we allocated more towards family vouchers than we ever had allocated. And even so, we tracked the voucher spending very closely during the season to make sure that if folks were getting to a point where they were exhausting their budgets and felt that they, in order to not turn anybody away, to families away, we had to monitor their budgets and made sure that those that weren't spending, we could take monies from those programs and move them to those that were spending, to make sure that there weren't any families turned away due to an issue of resource allocation. And so, again, we've organized the shelters by those located within the city, those that we considered shared locations, which in previous years and this past year had been funded jointly by city and county. We know going forward we're just going to allocate city monies into city-located programs, county monies into county-located programs. And then the bottom shelters are those that are within or outside of the city. So we would consider those county locations.
Yeah.
The achievement of this last season was that we provided over 154,000 bed nights, which is the unit of service per persons per night. We provided over 309,000 meals to those in the winter shelter program. Again, I talked about the 4% increase, and the families was where we saw a very significant increase. We served 620 families this season, which was an 87% increase to the prior season where we saw 330 families. So that was definitely a very significant increase that we saw. And then after the memo, I have 5 pages of graphs and charts that break down. The pie charts show the distribution of residency amongst all the 13 shelters. The line charts show, again, the percentage utilization, and these are by individual, all the 13 individual locations. The second page breaks it down by service planning area. You know, LASA uses 8 service planning areas. The third and fourth pages are the 2007-2008 year, so you could look at for comparison's sake. And the last page is the family report, where you can see shelter by shelter the number of families that were served in one season compared to the number of families that were served this last season, and you can see some of the increases there. So again, this is essentially what I came to discuss. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer questions.
Just tell me when LASA is going to have the final report on utilization and the data for the program.
So our reports are actually due to our funders, the city and the county, at the end of the month. So we expect by the end of the month we'll have compiled reports.
Maybe you can come back for our next meeting.
Sure.
If I could jump in for one quick second. My problem is winter shelters are a joke. They should be permanent 24/7. There's no winter here anyhow. And we have different kinds of climates during different periods. We were struggling to get that armory, and we had to go to the governor himself to let that armory be used. So both my Culver City, I consider it mine, it's in a little strip, but it's our people, and the West LA is roughly 310 beds. What do we need to do getting ready for this winter first to secure locations so that we have it? And secondly, how do I get beyond this moment in time? When I walk into those shelters, this year I went with one of my constituents with boxes of free socks, and we gave out socks, and I talked to people. I'm an old social worker. They were all over me, wanting connections to this, that, and the other. One individual, and I like the group that manages it, so he was showing me all kinds of diseases on his body that needed immediate attention. Practically everyone in those shelters obviously could use a wraparound social connecting point that could maybe move them from where they are to something else. But the moment they start to feel comfortable going to the shelter, starting to get relationships with people, we shut the door and throw them out. So I don't really like it. I would either want us to be more clear that it is not permanent housing supportive services, which of course is the ultimate Cadillac. You can go to 50 to 500, and let's get up to 80,000, which we got here. So we'll all be dead by the time we hit that number, unless we accelerate it beyond belief. I mean, come on, let's be candid of what we're dealing with here. But back to the winter shelter program. How do I, know I can open it up December 15th again? And two, more importantly, how do I extend it? Okay. Any comments on that at this point?
Sure. So the first question was about issues to work on towards next season. In discussions with the National Guard, we're expecting the West LA Armory to be available as it has been this past season. Culver City, there's a little bit of a concern. They are citing a week in February where they want to conduct exercises. Right now, actually, one of the unique things about Culver City Armory is that the land is owned by the city of Culver City, and the Armory, the National Guard, basically leases it at no cost. They're renegotiating the lease, and I think Culver City is concerned, rightfully so, about the availability of the National Guard Armory for the winter shelter program, and that's something that they're considering in terms of renegotiating their lease with the National Guard. So we're, I'm watching that and staying in communication with Culver City, and we'll certainly notify, your office and other groups on the west side if it becomes a larger issue than that. But right now, the Culver City is working with the National Guard on that matter. And then your second question was about being more than a seasonal program. We're also coming to our board next month with a report on what two things. I mean, what would it cost to take the winter shelter year-round, or the flip side of that, what could we get on a year-round basis with the monies we currently allocate to winter shelter? So we're expecting to put an analysis together on that, and could certainly come back and report the same information to this body. But I think the same concern has been voiced by our commission. Part of the challenge, particularly with the winter shelter program, and we saw this several years back when the winter shelter went year-round, is that certain facilities, when they're controlled by the agencies, they have the ability to go year-round. The armories, one from the state, they're only available for a season. In the East San Gabriel Valley, they use churches, and the churches, actually, they rotate churches, and each church has, hosts for 2 weeks. So not when the facilities aren't the operators, site control becomes a very big, a very real challenge for those communities. But again, we are looking at that and planning to report back to our commission, and could certainly offer the same report at this body.
Okay, and the other thing was the city of Santa Monica, which, homeless knows no geography. Let's just be clear about that. Refused to have takeoff and drop-off points. Whatever their logic was, it was. How did that impact, if at all, the program?
I'm not aware that it impacted the program. I think there was concerns with reducing the number of pickup sites, that those remaining would be more impacted. But I hadn't heard from our provider or the communities that was the case. So we're certainly open. Ultimately, we want the communities that the shelters serve to take ownership in the winter shelter programs and help come up with solutions on how to run a better program. And so we're open to working with communities, but again, we have to work with what we're given to some
I had
extent.
no problem with Santa Monica, actually, because there's the network among homeless, and if you're told to go to a certain block, they'll all show up from wherever they're coming from. They're more sophisticated than people give people credit for it, because they seriously want a place to sleep.
And I think that's exactly the point. I don't think that the shelters or Santa Monica necessarily felt an impact. It was the beneficiaries, the clients that used the shelters that were sent, an additional.
That's why I compliment Santa Monica. I didn't want to get into any ego on that kind of thing. Last question on that is, do we have any analysis, like, for instance, in the two shelters that are in my world, who these people are, where they're from, what their background? Have we gotten that data? And if we have it, could you do that as a report back, so I know how many come from where and whatever?
Yes, we do have that information, and we're still compiling that. That's part of the information we can report back.
Okay.
If we get a report back on that, that'd be great.
Okay.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much.
That'll be it on that one. We're going to continue item 5, because I don't want to run out of time, and item 6 is a very big item for Mr. Rosendahl. But I do want to say, on behalf of Council President Garcetti, for item 5, and you'll come back in the next meeting, he had gotten some feedback from stakeholders on, I guess, the survey that was used in the homeless count. I'm guessing that this is correct. Was it 16 pages long? Was it? Roughly. Okay. Well, he said that was kind of onerous in terms of holding the attention of people who are, basically living on the street. And if they could, you might want to talk with his office about what revisions they would suggest, and we'll have you come back at the next meeting. So with that, let's go on to item 6, and I have to say thank you to Mr. Rosendahl for really getting out there on this issue, because this is not an easy issue to handle, and new to this area, and he's very courageous.
Well, thank you, Madam President, or Madam Chair.
You promote me again.
I'll make her anything.
Okay, that's fine.
To get things done, it's really important that we all learn how to work together. Can we ask staff to come on up on this motion, and could we ask the CLA to describe what item 6 is?
Item 6 is a motion, Rosendahl-Zine, relative to creating a provision for council members to designate discrete and distinct areas of their council districts where people would be allowed to park and sleep overnight.
Is DOT in the room as well?
You want us to call somebody?
Yeah, we'd love somebody from DOT in the room.
Up on this?
We obviously want the CLA and the CAO and anybody else to speak. Let me explain from my perspective, and I'd love for City Attorney, are they in the room too?
Yeah, she's right there. She's
Oh, great.
left there.
Great.
To your left.
Great.
The
great,
DOT
great.
would be really good.
Yeah, we'd like DOT in the room too. Okay, explain the motion.
The motion that was made, your motion?
Yeah.
Well,
All right, I'll do it, but we want the city attorney's office to react to it. I put a motion in on November 18th, 2008, and what this motion basically says is that we have a law on the books that says it's a criminal act to sleep in your car and your camper. I personally think it's a dumb law because people sleep in their cars and their campers. And it's also frustrating for the officers who want to carry out the law that when they bang on the door, the person comes to the door and they're not sleeping. So they're frustrated because they can't police a law that exists. I'm frustrated because I think it's a bad law. I think people sleeping in their cars and campers should be acceptable, but it depends where and how that is done. As I'm moving forward with restricted parking on 40 blocks out of roughly, 400 or 500, everything west of Lincoln in my Venice area there, I want to be able to have those cars and camper occupants go to an area where it would be legal for them to sleep in it, but only in those areas that we designate that make it legal for them to sleep in those areas. So what that does do is provide an opportunity for people in cars and campers that might be restricted from certain streets to be in a location that is accepted by the community, and that's the most difficult part, is to cite areas where we could do this, but also with social service wraparound opportunities and also with the dignity that people living in cars and campers should get. That's my interpretation of my motion. That is an amendment to 85.02. And I have a bunch of report backs that I would like to get at a certain point, but I would like to open up the motion now for public comment. And I have 3 folks who filled out cards so far. And if anybody else who hadn't wants to ask a question and help understand it, I would love for them to come up as well. We have Linda Lux, we have Carolyn Rios, and we have Booker Pearson. If the 3 could come up, and I was hoping you did, and I was looking for it. Come on up, Mark. Come on up, Mark. It might be sitting through the process over there. And it looks like David Ewing, better known as the preacher, is also here. And Steve Clare, better known as a great man for housing issues in our district. Okay, let me just start quickly with you, Linda, since I mentioned your name.
Thank you, Councilman. Is Councilwoman Perry coming back in? Yes. Chairwoman Karen?
She's right behind you.
Oh, good. I'm not just here. I'd like her to hear this, too, as well. It's okay.
We are human first. Where's Peggy Lee Kennedy? Is she here, too? Oh, good, Peggy. Great.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Go ahead, Linda.
I'll begin.
Start it off.
Yes, I'm Linda Lux. I'm a 39-year resident of Venice. For purposes of
39 years old, which I was going to say yes.
Right. A child bride.
Born there.
For purposes of identification only, I'm also Vice President of the Venice Neighborhood Council and, as you know, President of the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners of the city. My primary concern and my only concern for being here today is my Venice residency. I'm here to urge support for the councilman's brave motion to find safe parking places for RVs all over the city. I look at this as a pilot program that's innovative, that's used in other cities, as a model, Eugene, Oregon, and in Santa Barbara, to name two, that could be used as a model in the city to go forward. Hearing what we sat through before in the Project 50 and other innovative programs that are successful, I see this as another niche in that whole program to keep people one step out of their houses but not yet on the streets, and get them services in a safe way with permits and wraparound services, et cetera. But I don't think it's widely known outside of Venice that this is a citywide pilot program, and I need you to confirm that
When it
is.
comes to the citywide, I'm going to defer to the 14 colleagues and their opinions. I don't necessarily feel that they need to weigh in on my 11th district, though I wish they would, and I wish they would all go the same route I'm going. But I'm not going to make that a requirement because I want to get it done in my Venice.
Well, I think it would make it more difficult to get it done just in one district when it's really a citywide problem. I mean, it's kind of assumed that Venice has an overabundance of RVs. I don't know that that's true.
No, if you can help me count to 8 or 10, I'd be more than happy to go.
Well, I just want you to know that this, just because it looks like more wind up in Venice, is they're more visible. It's a beach community. The streets are narrow. You can see them. I don't know that there aren't equally many, if not more, in other parts of the city. And it's a social problem for the entire city, not just for Venice. I would like another moment, if I could have another.
Go for it.
Minute. Okay, I appreciate that. I do think that you've mentioned a couple times the restrictive parking measures you're trying to go forward. I think that morphed out of the concern that many residents have about the RV parking problem, and I think it's an unfortunate move, because I think you do have a lot of tools in your arsenal to deal with the RV situation, which is a problem, but it's a social problem. And I don't think requiring the rest of us to have to pay taxes to park on our streets, if we had a streets, which I don't because I'm at the beach, is a way to take a sledgehammer to a problem that can be surgically dealt with.
Well, let me just
So
make
that's
it for the record so you understand this. Everywhere in the city, east of Lincoln Boulevard, has restricted parking. Everywhere does, except for the coastal district part, which is west of Lincoln.
And I know that. And that's why we have
That
the
is
Coastal
only
Commission,
area.
which
I know.
has a mandate of protecting.
It's the only area where restricted parking doesn't have an opportunity to either exist or not exist.
And that's to keep the beach access to the public. So that's a whole other thing. I don't need to get into time. But what I'm saying is that I think it needs to be looked at from a broader perspective of the city as a pilot program for the city, and not, I think you'd have more success if you did it outside your district, and you'd have less opposition from the people in your district, of which I'm not one of them. I'm for this motion. I think it's wonderful. But I would like to see, maybe Councilwoman Perry, to see if you think something like that would work in your district, and if you think it's a problem in your district.
I've probably built, and this is not against Bill, but not at all, because I support Bill, but I probably got a heck of a lot more of a permanent supportive housing in my district than anywhere else in the city. So the need for me to have a program like this is probably going to be a lot less than what Bill needs. Bill got elected after me, and he's doing what he needs to do to represent the district. So, we get how do I say this? We have very few people south of Washington Boulevard who have RVs.
Or cars. It could be in there. You haven't done a count, though.
No,
Okay.
actually we do, because
Okay.
we get complaints from people who are living in, say, they're not RVs, they're basically broken down trailers.
Right.
Who don't
Same
have
thing.
wheels.
Yep.
They don't have wheels, they can't move. They're just
But they're
stuck.
dwellings.
Well, yeah,
But-
less
but
than
just
having.
to- just
It's
to
very
com-
different, there's a different
much
demographic. If I found a groundswell or a concentration of people who had RVs in the district who wanted to create a community, I would certainly be interested in exploring that. But like I said, I've been really aggressive in building permanent supportive housing. I haven't run away from it. I've done it both downtown and in South LA. So, I'm doing really well for having units for people to live in.
Yeah. But know this also, the reality is, it's 2009 and the squeaky wheel gets the energy. Throughout the city of Los Angeles for the last 30 years, people have been putting up restricted parking, everything east of Lincoln. And what has happened is part of the concentration in Venice is because that's the only place where some people can find the kind of ability to park. In this district here, there's restricted here. So a lot of it over the last 30 years has continued to add a concentration to one particular area, not by anybody's plan, but by the reality of it. Plus, everywhere else, it's 50% plus one. And I'm going 2/3. But that's a good discussion to go forward. I appreciate it.
And I'm looking forward to having that full discussion
And I
with you
look forward
soon.
to that.
Okay. And
Carolyn?
what? Yes, go ahead.
My name's Carolyn Rios. For identification purposes, I'm a board member of the Venice Neighborhood Council, and I am speaking for myself right now. I congratulate you. I just think this is a wonderful motion that's been long overdue. And I want to encourage you to not add a lot of restrictions to it. It is wonderful the way you have written it. Because it allows for, it's a pilot program. I really do encourage you to promote this throughout the city. Actually, even more so now that you mentioned that why there are so many in Venice, that it should be throughout the city. I think the less restrictions we have, the more creative solutions we get. This is an opportunity for us to be a leader in the country, for that matter. You know, we've got Eugene and Santa Barbara, but they're tiny little towns with lots of land. Yeah. And we need to look into all the different possibilities. There's streets, there's commercial and industrial streets, there's private property, there's the Costco's and the Walmarts, there's churches. They should all be encouraged to participate in this program. The other thing that I think we need to promote, or you need to promote in order to get this through, is the fact that, and I'm not good with statistics, so somebody can correct me, I think 30%, the amount of money that we spend on the legal system, the mental health system, the emergency services. Captain Robin Richards came to a meeting once and said that something like 70 or 80% of his time is on homeless problems. If we provide stability to these people in RVs who are not criminals, if we decriminalize them, then the money that we're saving, because we're going to be introducing them to better services, let's assume, and we will cut down the cost on some policing, some mental health problems that we'll be getting to. You know, just like, this is like a program, this is like a LAMP program for the RV dwellers are the elite of the homeless. This is an elite LAMP program because if you wrap it around social services, we by nature are spending less money on those, and then we can get to the other people as we can. I guess that's pretty much what I have to say, and I really want to thank you for offering this.
Well, I appreciate you speaking on our behalf, too. Booker? Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I just put it in the order that I had mentioned.
My name is Booker Pearson. I am a member of the Westchester Playa Neighborhood Council. And I am chair of the Committee on Homeless Vehicular Parking, but we have not made a recommendation or decision, so I am speaking as a private citizen to tell Council Member Perry and Bill Rosendahl that I personally am very in favor of this courageous move also, and that I think that we'll have a cogent and holistic approach to the homeless problem, which is, it's not isolated to just individuals sleeping in Venice. We need to do probably a count in Westchester also to quantify the problem. I would also like to add that it is not a stratified problem, that it's a homogeneous, a holistic problem, and that there are many children in this district. And children don't upset people. They're the unseen, unknown. They don't urinate in your backyard. They don't throw beer bottles at you. Right. And they don't disturb businesses. But we've seen a huge increase in children. In fact, the LASA report that we just got said there's a 87% increase in families with children in the shelters. So, Council Member Perry, I was very, very encouraged that you asked the question, how do we get more Section 8s for homeless, designated for homeless families? Because in my other life, and part of my identification is I am president of a board of a charity that ministers to homeless children and families. It's Upward Bound House, located in one in Santa Monica and a new location that you and Councilmember Rosendahl supported in Culver City, which is, he says, is completely enveloped by the city of Los Angeles. And we're very appreciative of support that you gave us. But I'd like, can I have like 30 more seconds, sir?
Go for it.
I'd like to say that the ROI on what's happening, I think, because of the adults and the Project 50 people are so visible that the children are forgotten and the families are forgotten. And we're seeing a tsunami of homeless children in this county. We are seeing anywhere from 40 to 600% increase in the number of homeless children because of economic reasons. I applaud you, Council Member Perry, because to ask for those Section 8s. We've gotten 600 children, over 600 children in 11 years in permanent housing with their families. We have a 95% retention rate. We spend less than $15,000 a child. It's a huge ROI. The children left on the street will cost us hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars because they have a high propensity to be antisocial, to be incarcerated, to be have mental health problems.
And they're also hard to count in the census, so
Yeah.
maybe you can help
They-
Mr. Rosendahl on that.
They're totally uncounted.
Great.
Even the 87% increase, we think by anecdotal evidence, there's probably a 400% increase. So I would beg, plead, and cajole both of you fine people to help us, as you said, Councilmember Perry. I think part of the solution is to get more Section 8s for homeless families who are on the streets right now, and to help support our friends at LASA, who have given some operating money to Upward Bound House to operate the temporary shelter for those children who are sleeping on the street tonight, and get them off the street.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your leadership with Upward Bound. It was not an easy task to get that location. It wasn't a Culver City issue, it was my issue, because I'm completely around that little street side that is theirs. We had mixed signals from community on it, but the bottom line is it's parents with children, and to give a child a chance has got to be everybody's first priority. So thank you for your leadership and what you've done with all of us on that. Appreciate it very much. Mark Radovic. And we have DOT here?
They're on their way.
They're on their way. Great.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Radovic. I'm a known commodity to Ms. Perry and to Councilman Rosendahl, but just for the record, I'm a 20-year resident this month of Venice, and I'm a former legislative analyst for the City of Los Angeles, and I used to be paid by the city to look at these kinds of proposals critically. And I'm here wearing two hats. One of them is a representative of the Venice Stakeholders Association, and the other, for identification purposes, I'm the co-chair of the Venice Neighborhood Council's ad hoc committee on homelessness and vehicular occupation, i.e. RVs. Wearing the VSA hat, Venice Stakeholders Association, we forwarded to the City Council and the Mayor a letter back on January 10th, which laid out a variety of concerns that we have with the Councilman's proposal. The Councilman see it. I hope you've had a chance to look at it. I know that Councilman Garcetti got it. Basically, we support the intent wholeheartedly of your motion. We want to see services and housing provided to those who are in RVs that need services and housing. We have a great deal of concerns about the way the motion is constructed, and if I can just go over some of the highlights. The first one is that we oppose council members being given the authority to cite RV parks without any appeal process to residents or to adjoining property owners. Council members cannot unilaterally cite churches or liquor stores, recycling centers, a variety of other uses. These are land use decisions governed by the planning code's conditional use process. Citing of RV sites should be governed by the same type of process, and we would highly urge you to refer the motion to the Planning Committee and the Planning Commission for their consultation on setting up a conditional use permit process. The participants must be means tested. There's nothing in your motion that raises the question. Right now, anybody who's paying $30 at Dockweiler can move over and stay in one of these facilities for free. That's not the audience that you want to serve, so that really needs to be part of the motion. Any RV lots must, in our estimation, should be at least 300 feet from any residences. The city should not attempt to solve one group's problems, i.e. those living in RVs, at the cost of others, and open up a window that would be a great deal of burden on residents or commercial owners. Any sites should be widely dispersed across the city and not all foisted upon one area. And we are opposed to street segments being used as sites for RVs overnight. We think it's in their best interest, the residents and the community's best interest, that they get off the street. That for two purposes. One, if they're on the street, they're going to attract more RVs to other street areas. That's one. Two, it continues the process of leak. These are old, decrepit RVs in many instances. They leak sewage. And right now that sewage is going directly to the bay. In some cases, it's being consciously dumped in people's yards or to the bay. So we need them off the streets and into secure sites. Now, if I can take just one more second here, and if I could wear my hat as a co-chair with Ms. Rios of the VNC Ad Hoc Committee on Homelessness and Vehicle Occupation, I cannot say that this is yet a formal recommendation, since it has not been presented to the VNC yet. On the other hand, it is public knowledge. It is on our website. It was approved on the April 2nd meeting. This is a proposal for a pilot program, full-blown, all the details, for a vehicle-to-housing transition program. I'd ask you just take public notice of the fact that this was approved, and it has three components. We took the Eugene, Oregon model, and we adapted it to LA realities. So there's a long description of the program elements, the restrictions, the participants, how it should operate, and so forth. Two, we drafted a draft conditional use permit. I used to be a legislative analyst. I used to be staff to the city's planning committee at one point. I also used to be a land use consultant. So we drafted a conditional use permit that you could just pick up, put in the planning code, and instead of amending 8502, which we think is a bad move, you simply use a conditional use permit to provide exemptions to specific sites that have some controls where residents and neighbors can comment on, you should think about the ingress, the egress, the noise, the this, the that. It allows you to put controls on each site. And finally, we did the hard work, at least in the councilman's district. We found 20 sites. 20 sites that are 300 feet from residences, that are spread all over the district, that are parking lots, stretch all the way from Dockweiler to Brentwood. So at least for CD11, we've scoped this all out. Now again, will be going as a recommendation to the Venice Neighborhood Council.
What I'd like to do with all this, Mark, is turn it over to both the CLA and the CAO and the city attorney to comment on it when we come back in 45 days on everything that you've said. I understand that.
It was adopted by the committee.
It's okay.
Carolyn.
When you guys go through your process, if you go for it or not go for it,
it's not been approved by the VNC.
We're going to have staff look at it.
It is public information.
Okay?
It's
just going to be looked at. There's no attitude taken one way or the other. I just want to get a reaction from the internal city staff on everything that Mark just said, including what he did propose here just now. So we'll get a report back on all of that on the record as to how the city interacts with what he said. Okay? So I just want to make that clear, and I appreciate you coming here today. David, better known as the preacher for those who don't know.
Hi, I'm David Ewing. I'm a Venice resident for 30-something years. Hello, Ms. Perry and Bill Rosendahl. I just wanted to say that the gentleman who spoke previous to the most recent speaker mentioned a tsunami of children and families, and I'm afraid you ain't seen nothing yet. With this economic meltdown, it's going to be horrific, and we really have to get out ahead of this now, because the city's stretched so thin already. If we get behind the curve on this, there's going to be no catching up. So I just urge you to please move with all possible haste. And I agree with Mr. Ryovic that land use rules should be maintained, and that all the T's should be crossed and the I's dotted. But just to please think of this as a citywide program, whether it's adopted citywide or not, to think about it as a citywide program and a citywide solution, because this is going to be a tidal wave, and we're going to be bursting at the seams. Venice, I think, probably does get more than its share of campers. It's not. I've heard it referred to as a lifestyle choice, and I think it is a choice between the lifestyle of living in an RV and the lifestyle of living on the sidewalk. That's the lifestyle choice. Now, once you're in the RV, where would you rather live? I think the beach is a popular place to live, and it's partly because Venice has a lot of services as well as people. And so I think we probably do get more than our share, but it's certainly going to be a citywide problem. It's a problem that getting kicked from neighborhood to neighborhood to neighborhood without a solution. And kicking it from one neighborhood to another doesn't do anything for the homeless people. It doesn't do anything for the city. It only does for the neighborhood that gets rid of the problem by foisting it on somebody else.
Thank you, David, and I appreciate that very much. And as we all know here, the city of Santa Monica has an ordinance. There is no cars or campers allowed in any residential area, and so does Malibu, so does El Segundo, so does all the other beach communities, and in part, those in the coastal zone. The reality is Venice has been the only open community that has been supportive of all kinds of ways of life. And so,
well, we like to be an open community.
Santa Monica right next door, and El Segundo just down the road, and Malibu just up from the Palisades are right in our immediate physical area. So I appreciate your comments. Peggy Lee Stevenson. Peggy Lee Kennedy. Where did Stevenson come from? Flashback.
Peggy Lee Kennedy. I disagree with Mr. Ryovac in many areas. And I'll tell you what's really different about Venice is we have a lot of people, community leaders and organizations that want to help people, that want to include people in the community. We care. And if that committee, which he is co-chair of, actually represented the community, it would have told everybody that this was on the agenda, and nobody knew, because the only place that it was announced was in that committee. So that is a rotten shame. So we had to find out secondhand. Now, I got, since last night, I got some letters. People actually wrote letters since last night. That's considerable. Community leaders that couldn't show up today. One of the letters I got was from a minor who lives in an RV, and it looks like this.
Yeah.
And he says, "Am I not human? Are you not human? As a human, I like to be safe. I am sure you like to be safe. And if you have children, which I am one, you wish for them to be safe. Under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 3 says, I have right to security of person. I think that the police banging holes in my door, yes, they banged a dent in my door. I was inside at the time. Is breaking, and he lists it, and he talks about the police, and he's a member of our community, and he's not a drug addict, and he didn't choose to be homeless, and his mom cannot afford rent, and she is disabled, and this is a situation, it is an emergency situation. It is not a land use situation. This is a crisis. The city made it legal for tourists to sleep on the beach in Venice when LA hosted the Olympics. So I think that the city can make some legal places for its own people to sleep in an RV in Venice. I don't think it's that hard. There are a lot of parking lots. I think there's like over 500 spaces and just city lots. I'm not sure what the total count is, but we have services second to only Skid Row that I know of. We have some knockout services there, and that is a major reason people are there. We have the services. Another reason we have people living in RVs there is because they used to rent there. They used to own homes there. These are part of the community that are displaced because they can't afford to pay rent. Maybe they used to live in Lincoln Place.
A number of people from Lincoln Place.
And you know what? I've fed them, and I've documented the police harassing them. And I've known the ones that have dropped dead out of stress and age. I mean, people are dying. It's just a serious emergency situation. It's not a land use situation. It's a human issue.
Okay, I appreciate your comments, and please work with us in finding those locations that you mentioned, 500 parking spots. I'd love to see them, I'd like to get them on a map, and if I can get the city to make things legal that would allow those places to be opportunities for people with dignity, I want to go there.
We have Steve put together a map, and we'll arrange a meeting with you, a follow-up meeting.
Look forward to it. Yeah, and the last public comment at this point is Steve Clare.
Oh, sorry, Steve.
My name's Steve Clare. I'm the oldest Venice resident at 40, apparently at this table anyway. I'm also the director of the Venice Community Housing Corporation. We provide affordable housing in Venice and Mar Vista. Last year, out of 460 people that we housed, 141 of them had previously been homeless. So we're working with through whatever financing is available to us to house the lowest income people that we can. Venice Community Housing Corporation and myself personally are fully in support of the proposed motion to amend 8502. I think it's a courageous act on Bill's part. I personally, and I think, I'm not sure I can speak for the organization on this, think that it is a good thing that the motion is framed the way it is, providing discretion for each council person to examine their own district, to look at the situation, look at not only the extent of the homelessness in their own district, but also the opportunities for providing parking lots or street parking available to allow people to park in their vehicles. I think I don't know whether it's a violation of human rights to exclude people altogether from living in the streets when they have no other place to live, but I certainly think, as other speakers have said, that it's good for the city to begin to try to get ahead of the curve and address this issue. Having legal places for people in vehicles to sleep at night is not a solution to the problem of homelessness. And I certainly commend you for leadership in finding permanent supportive housing for people in your district, and we need a heck of a lot more of that in the 11th district. But it is a start. I'm confident, as other people have said, that we've got services and energetic people who want to embrace and find ways to integrate these people into our own community. It has been, I think the last homeless count, there are 4 times more homeless people in Venice than there are in the county on average. People, and I'm not one of them, have estimated that the number of vehicles in Venice is somewhere between 100 and 200. I did do a parking analysis, and of I think 18 lots in Venice west of Lincoln Boulevard, there are over 1,700 parking spaces that might be made available for 100 to 150 people. Easily we can find space to allow in our own community to allow people to park overnight in a safe and legal way. And, as other people have also said, have access to services, to support, so that we can help them facilitate a transition from vehicle parking to permanent housing in our community. So I really urge you to favorably recommend this motion of the full council and with the flexibility that will allow every single council person to make their own assessment and determination of how or whether to integrate that into their district. We'll be leader, we'll be the first, and we'll do a great job of demonstrating that it is possible to create a supportive environment and house people in our community, and hopefully that will be incentive to other council people to follow through on theirs.
Well,
So thank you very
I want
much.
to thank you, Steve, for your leadership. You've created affordable housing, Section 8 housing, a not-for-profit in the Venice area. You and I looked at a facility down the street there that makes sense for another 18 units that I will participate with you in the purchase of. You've put your action where your mouth is, and I applaud you for all you've done. I also appreciate your ideas of where we could have these zoned areas where it would be legal to put your car and camper and provide the wraparound services. I look forward to working with you with that as well. And I want to appreciate everybody. Linda wants another comment.
Wanted to say one
Go
thing.
ahead,
I just
quickly.
have to reference the report that you were
Sure.
handed out that's not been approved by the Venice
I
Neighborhood
understand.
Council. And we
Totally
have very
understand.
strict rules that reports can't be disseminated until they're voted on and approved. So I don't want to get Carolyn in trouble, who's
Don't get
co-chair
anybody in
of that
trouble.
committee.
You can have that back, and when you approve it, you can get it
just
back
hasn't
to
been
us.
vetted. No one on the council has
want
read it. Yeah.
our city's offices to react to this, whatever you end up doing in your committees and councils and everything else. And I appreciate you making that comment. I'd like, if I could, to ask city staff to come on up, DOT as well. Ms. Perry was very clear about that. But let me just throw this out here. There are recommendations I want to make to go back to the city staff. But I will defer to the chair if you have anything in
that's fine.
particular.
No, I'm going to
Okay.
actually defer to you on this one.
Okay, I'm going to thank you for coming.
Sure.
The most important part where DOT can play in is to get with my community groups and help me find locations. And I want you to work with the police department, which is also working with us, and work with the neighborhood council, work with the community activist groups. My staff, Arturo Pena, will work closely with you on that. But the solution is, how do we deal with this issue? DOT has a role to play in it.
Let him put his name on the record, too.
And give us your name for the record and tell us about
Sure.
your area.
My name is Yadi Hashemi, and I'm responsible for your parking permits division, which includes all of your preferential parking districts as well as overnight parking and our newly created program, the oversized vehicle.
Okay, so you become a key player in this because we're dealing with an issue in Venice where people live in their cars and their campers, and we want to respect their right to live in the car and camper, but we want to find locations that work for all of us as places where they can put their car and camper for 3 reasons. One, we'd like to provide wraparound services for those that are in need of services. 2, we want to deal with health issues, which obviously require bathroom facilities and flushing opportunities. And 3, we want to deal with potential criminal issues and safety issues that also community cares about. So we look forward to your cooperation with our staff in dealing with that.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I'm responsible for permit parking.
Right.
They didn't have anyone else to come here today. I would certainly go ahead and pass that message on to Amir and others in our department that deal with off-street parking, as well as also, as you know, we created the oversized vehicle parking district. We have had a period of several months where we've had pilots in 2 areas of the city.
Right.
And so I'll be overseeing that. If there is any way that any modifications to that will be necessary to benefit your program, if I may take off my city employee hat,
Yes.
it's absolutely a noble cause, and I applaud you all. So to the extent that we can.
Bless you for your
Thank you
comment,
very much.
and I appreciate your cooperation and support in helping us make these dreams a reality here. So here are my recommendations, Madam Chair, if this will meet everybody's approval. We would like the CLA and the city attorney to report back in 45 days on what precise steps would be required for the city council to authorize overnight parking zones. We would like the CLA and the city attorney should specifically address, 1, what sort of permitting process should be required, what the minimum distance should be from residential amenities and residential areas, whether there should be a limit on the number of overnight zones in a designated planning area, for what social services must be provided to make each zone function and useful to the residents in that zone, potential funding sources of how we can do this. We like the CLA and the city attorney should consult with neighborhood council reps, with service providers, homeless advocates, and interested council offices in making their recommendations. That's what we'd like to see come back.
I have one more thing to add when you're
Please,
done.
yes.
If we can ask LASA to respond as to whether or not homeless prevention and rapid rehousing funds can be of use here in terms of outreach, case management, and finding new housing opportunities beyond the RV.
Beautiful. That would be great. And the 45-day window gives us a chance to begin to look at it. There's also, when we heard some of the comments by some of the people here, we would want this report back first, okay? And then we would like to look at the other committees that will be part of this, and maybe even Plum, since it is the planning department that does have a role in this. Your report back should address most of what you heard of concerns here from folks, and I appreciate your work on this project.
We have been working closely with your staff to examine the Santa Barbara project. We've spoken with them on the phone a couple of times to get a better idea of how that project operates there, what type of sites they've identified. We've requested the budget for the service piece of that. And so we are working at least on the service side.
Hold your motion in committee, Mr. Rosendahl.
Yes, keep it in committee and bring back those reports in 45 days. And I might say I want you to also look at Eugene, Oregon. They've been doing this for about 11 years now. They have a longer track record than Santa Barbara. But as someone mentioned, Santa Barbara and Eugene, Oregon are not as large and as challenged as we are here when we're surrounded by other cities that have taken nothing but throw them into my face, and everybody right now is in a tense spot.
We were looking at Santa Barbara simply because it's also in the state of California and would be subject to the same types of other outside regulations that the city is subject to.
But just in conclusion, Madam Chair, I want you to know that because of us addressing this issue, it's become a national and international issue where people realize that this is at least the beginning of addressing it from an honest perspective with integrity for the people who live in the cars and campers as well as for the residents.
Appreciate it. Great. I'm glad you put it on the table.
Good. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Okay, and we'll have a report back on that at our next meeting. This is the portion of the meeting that is open for public comment for those items that are not on the agenda. Anybody wishing to speak on an item that is not on the agenda could come forward at this time. Seeing that no one is coming forward, the meeting is adjourned, and thank you everybody for your patience.